Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So today, dolls, we're making cakes. Now, dolls, these aren't real fancy cakes. These are some basic cakes that we always had for Thanksgiving in my family. So I thought it was necessary to make sure the dolls had it as well. So you just start with a simple ball, flatten it a little bit, and then I use a small cylinder clay cutter to cut a simple hole in the center to give it the impression that it's a cake that's made with a tube pan. After that, I did flatten it a little bit with my tongue depressor to flatten it out, and then I used my clay tool to roll around the sides to raise up the outer walls of the cake and to make it more uniform. Now I did distort my center a little bit, so I will need to use my cylinder tool to straighten up my center hole a little bit. Now dolls, these cakes are very simple to make, but take your time. Now after you're comfortable with the shape of your cake, you definitely want to add some texture. Now I am using a wire tool. Now dolls, you can actually just use a crumpled up piece of aluminum foil to add texture, but I'm just using my brush. Now dolls, to make the chocolate cake, it was the exact same technique, I just didn't cut out the center. I simply cut out a slice and texturized the inside of the sliced portion. Now here is a solid yellow cake as well. I cut 2 slices out of it. Now here is my cake. There are my slices. I've textured the inside and they've been baked. Now it's time to move along and make the icing for these cakes. Now both of the cakes are going to have chocolate icing. I'm using my liquid Sculpey in the color white, and I'm squeezing out a generous portion because I'm icing 2 cakes and the slices. So I added a big chunk of chocolate colored clay and used one of my metal tools to mix the liquid clay with the solid clay to create my chocolate icing for both cakes. Now again, if you're doing several cakes, you may want to make your batch of icing a little bit bigger so you don't run out in the middle of icing your desserts. And after I got my icing to the consistency that I wanted it, I just began to spread it on the cake. And dolls, it's just like icing a real cake. You just take your time. Now I will advise just do small portions at a time because the icing made with polymer clay is real peaky, so you get those little peaks on it really easily. So you want to do it gently because you don't want to make it look stringy and strange. So just take your time and do small amounts at a time, and definitely use a tool, whether you use a really small metal tool like I'm using, or if you're just using a small plastic spatula or knife. Just take your time. Just don't be in a rush because after you bake it, it's set. So take your time to make sure you get it the thickness you want it on all parts of your cake, and make sure you look at all sides to make sure you get full and complete coverage all the way down to the plate. Now my cake is actually formed onto the plate, so it's actually stuck to it already. I haven't glued it or anything. It's just stuck on the plate because that's how I baked it. Just make sure you follow the baking instructions on your polymer clay package. Now dolls, I wasn't going to show you, but when I went to ice my slices, I kind of messed them up a little bit, so I'm going to have to touch them up after they've baked. Now dolls, be advised, it's very easy to ice a cake that's already been baked. I would not advise trying to ice a cake and you haven't baked the body of the cake yet, because you could end up distorting the shape while trying to add the icing. Now this one was a little bit easier because the cake and the icing is the same color. So even if I made a little mistake, you wouldn't notice it. So I did ice that little slice as well. Now here we are with the tube pan pound cake, and it has been baked. And I just want to add a really popular or familiar icing to the top of this cake. Now I am adding a little bit of shading to give the impression of that wonderful, buttery, crunchy brown crust. Now, dolls, I know we're making this out of clay, but I'm really starting to want cake. Now, over the years, there was always someone who brought a cake to the family dinner. It was a pound cake, a lemon butter pound cake, but it always had this white kind of glaze dribbled across the top of it. I guess it was just powdered sugar and vanilla. Really simple. It wasn't a heavy icing, just a glaze. I guess the glaze was simple so as not to distract you from how wonderful the actual cake was. Okay, now dolls, now that everything has been baked and solid, I don't have to worry about messing anything up. So now it's time to add my triple thick glaze, and it's going to give it a beautiful shine and really, really bring it to life. Dolls, always pay close attention to the details when you're working with food and things like that. Things like the shine or the color or the texture. Those are the little details that really make miniatures delightful. So now instead of it looking like a little clay replica, it actually looks like a small edible cake. I have an overactive imagination. I literally feel like I can smell the chocolate. Now I do realize that the triple thick glaze kind of looks a little whitish and kind of cloudy as I'm adding it to the surface of my cake, but no worries, dolls. That will dry absolutely clear. You won't be able to see it at all. And I did add the same glaze to the double chocolate cake as well. I have to admit, I'm getting really excited about the holidays and the celebrations for the dolls. I feel so fortunate to be able to celebrate with my dolls and to celebrate in my real life. This is always the time of year I take the time to reflect and think about all the wonderful things I have to be grateful for. Now that we're done adding all of the chocolate icing to the other two cakes, here we are with the pound cake with the white glaze on it. Now look how buttery and rich that looks now that I added a little shine to it. The shine makes all the difference. Now I have to admit I wasn't happy with the yellow cake with the chocolate icing. I really feel like that should have been a layer cake. So I'm going to do a faux layer, which is just adding some icing across the middle of the slice. Now I still had some of that chocolate icing, and I just took my pointed tool and drug it across the texture of the cake in a straight line. Now you're probably wondering like, well, what is she going to do because you've already glazed it? So what I'm doing is just adding the chocolate icing to the center of the cake to give it the illusion of the layers or a layer cake. And then I'm going to seal it with the triple thick glaze just on top of that chocolate stripe and seal off the clay so that it won't move and smudge. I'm really glad I took the time to make that a layer cake because I really wasn't satisfied with it. Now it's time for me to move on to pies, which will be part 2 of the desserts. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.